It's season 2 of Behind the Message, the podcast. We're Daniel and Laura, or Ryan and Elizabeth, depending on which name you want to use.
All right.
Good.
All right, we're back. You excited?
So excited.
All right, we're in Philippians chapter 1. Let's pick up in verse 12. Read through verse 18.
Yeah. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice.
Well, all right, so let's jump in and kind of break it down. Paul comes back and he says, what has happened to me? And he's not quick to complain and just go into all the details. But he's been arrested.
Yep.
He's been mistreated. It's hard. He's suffered greatly.
Yes.
And he says that his suffering has served to advance the gospel. So what is evil, what is broken, God is redeeming and using to advance the good news of the gospel. He goes back through, he talks about the imperial guard and all those that are around him are beginning to hear and understand the good news of Jesus as a result.
Yeah.
And he's going to choose to rejoice in that. What does that example teach us about the way we navigate through everyday life, our trials, our hardships? We talked about it now on Sunday, but as you're thinking through it, how does it become convicting for you? How does it become challenging for you? And even as we talk about it and think about the way we frame aspects of our life, how can that begin to shape the way we just approach the day-to-day?
I think there's two things that really come to mind. The first one, you see this kind of almost like a dual implication of Paul's imprisonment. It is both, it itself is advancing the gospel because, to your point, the whole imperial guard and all of them are now hearing the gospel. He is put there for the defense of the gospel. But then you also see this implication of how that is impacting the other brothers. And they now are more confident in the Lord, and they are more bold to speak the word without fear. And so I think you have this challenge, or for me, it's challenging to think through my suffering is not just about me. And my response to suffering, yes, there is a faithful and an unfaithful response. There is an obedient and a disobedient response to hardship and to suffering. But that almost, if all we focus on is that's almost too short-sighted and too inward focused. I think there's an opportunity to recognize the way that others will be impacted by how we respond to things like that. And so I think that's one. And then the other one, you mentioned this when you were preaching a couple of weeks ago from back up in verse 9 when he's talking about the prayer that their love may abound. And he calls love a fruit of the Spirit. Well, joy is also a fruit of the Spirit. And so I think it's challenging to me when I think of rejoicing through suffering, through hardship. I think it's easy to kind of think, well, it's just a reaction and it's just an emotion. So hard things happen and I kind of have to just put on a smile and grit my teeth and get through it and pull up the bootstraps and say well, I rejoice because, God is good, whatever you want to say. But that's not really deep enough when we think about rejoicing. Joy comes from the Spirit, is a fruit of the Spirit. And so then it grows in the same way as we focus on not the things that are our circumstances, but the things that are to come and on Christ. And so those are two things that I'd say are challenging.
Yeah, I think stay with that for a minute. When we talk about rejoicing, we're not talking about rejoicing in the suffering or the evil or the injustice or the persecution. We're not rejoicing in that.
Spoiler alert, chapter 4, rejoice in the Lord always.
That's right. And so we're looking past those things and we're framing all of it and we're saying that isn't worth comparing to what lies ahead. We rejoice because God is going to finish his good work in us. Yeah. And all these things, he's going to work together for good, for our good, and the good of those who are in him. And so that idea is not you sit around and go, man, I'm glad that tragedy happened to me.
Right.
That's not it.
Right.
It's saying my joy is beyond this world. It's beyond the suffering of this world. It's beyond the hardship of this world. I look past these things. It's not that you would pretend like you don't feel loss.
Right.
You don't lament.
I love pain.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, so that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is we would aim and align our joy to what we claim to be true in the faith, that Jesus is supreme, and that our life exists in him. That's a purposed action. And to your point, it's not a reaction. And so how is it purpose? In knowledge and all discernment, right? And wisdom. And you see that play itself out here. He also goes on in the second half of those verses that you read, and he says, some indeed preach Christ from envy, rivalry, for bad motive.
And then kind of personal attack motives on Paul, thinking to afflict him while he's in prison.
That's right. So in other words, when the costs of the gospel seemingly benefit them in this world, in the way they feel, in those settings, they like to lean in and proclaim Jesus.
Yeah.
But when that would challenge them, it would cost them, those people are usually a lot quieter. And so Paul says there are those who would preach Jesus, but they do so for personal gain. And then there are those who preach Jesus from goodwill out of love, a love for who God is and a love for others.
Yeah.
And so he breaks that down exactly that way in verse 17. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. There you go, putting him down. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. So these people that are putting Paul down, preaching this God, like Paul's like, hey, as long as Jesus is made much of, I'm good.
Yeah.
We talked about this Sunday. It's a really important distinction to make sure you guys catch. We're talking about the person's motive, the one who's preaching. We're talking about their motive. We're not talking about the message.
That's right.
This passage gives no cover to a universalism.
Sure.
So you can just believe anything, preach anything, it's okay. No, I mean, that's clearly out of context with knowledge and all discernment and all the things that we've been reading, right? No, what we're seeing here is a separation between motive and message. And Paul's saying even those with broken, self-centered motive that will proclaim Jesus is Lord to his glory, and I would rejoice in it, even if they attack me.
Yeah.
I get that. I mean, I think I've felt that in ministry. I think there's been times where, for whatever reason, maybe I've even had someone and they are attacking me or attacking stuff around, and I can look through some of the stuff that they're maybe in, and it maybe seems immature to me or it's off. But the truth is, I know they're a Jesus follower. The Jesus they proclaim is the real, authentic Jesus, and I can just rejoice in that. I think that's a really good challenge. I think that was a really good point from Sunday. Anything to add to any of that?
Yeah, I think the kind of maturity that you're talking about to almost be able to kind of separate yourself from the situation and look at it a little bit more objectively, to say, yeah, I feel hurt, I feel, attacked, whatever the thing is, offended, but recognizing at the end of the day, Christ is proclaimed, and it's that I rejoice in. But then also there are some times, I think, where you will recognize, like, well, there are people who are not going to proclaim Christ. They're going to proclaim a distorted gospel or a prosperity gospel or a universalist gospel, pick the thing. And to your point, that's not what Paul's talking about. And so then our response to that is not the same, because the object of Christ, the proclamation of Christ, is what we rejoice in. And so when that's not present, that's what we pursue and move towards and shape towards.
That's right. So you're getting this contrast between these people who proclaim Jesus for selfish ambition, and Paul, who's even being attacked by those people, who's rejoicing in Christ proclaimed even to his own ridicule.
Right.
And that shows you everything about perspective.
Yeah.
And as Paul's talking about, look, I look forward, my hope is in Jesus, it's not in any of this stuff,
That's right.
nor even in the way those people perceive him. Yeah. It's that Christ would be glorified.
Well, and
we
if you
would live our life that way. Yeah.
if you understand what it is to live a life of sacrifice, then this makes sense. And how Paul's response to that can be rejoicing makes sense, because Paul lives as a living sacrifice, giving himself up for others to God. And so if that's messed up in our minds and we have selfish ambition, or we believe, and it's easy in our culture, like, well, I follow Jesus because that's what my family's always done, or that's just kind of what you do here in East Tennessee, and you have hope set on something for yourself, some gain, whether that's just I feel better when I go to church, or whether that's some sort of societal or familial gain that you'll get, then your hope is set on the wrong things. It's set on things that are present, things that are of self, not on the things that are of Christ. Yeah. And so the sacrifice aspect of that, I think, is really helpful in understanding how we respond that way.
So let me do something we don't normally do, and let me just kind of chase a rabbit away from the specifics of this text, but there's some overlap. We hear a lot from people about church hurt in our culture, church hurt, especially the West right now. You didn't hear so much about that for large runs of church history, but you hear a lot about it now. And there are real people who have suffered abuse and hurt within the church. And by that I mean from brothers and sisters in Christ, who are still sinful, still do things, who have suffered from wolves in sheep's clothing within kind of the umbrella of a church. That really happens. There's something else that is happening in that too, which is within our culture, more and more of us are focused on the things of this world and focused on self, and are very quick to feel offended and take the role of a victim, even if that is very slight.
Sure.
And what that shows is how self-focused we are, and how so many of those things are for our self-gain. A lot of times, and I'll give you from my own history. For the first 15 years in ministry, when someone would come up, maybe they're new, whatever else, they're coming to the church, and they would say something like, I've been hurt by the church or whatever else, I would always start with, I'm sorry. And I just kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt, even if I didn't think much of it. The last 10 years, I've stopped saying that. And the reason is because more and more of that is something that they feel that is not necessarily connected to the reality. I'll give you an example. My daughter, when she was like 3, I remember this, I use this all the time. She does something and Amy corrects her. It's for her good. And I was in the room. It wasn't harsh or anything like that. Amy just says, Lena, you can't do that stuff. She's 3. And Lena starts getting these big, teary things. And she goes, Mom, you hurt my feelings. And Amy turns and looks right back at Lena and says, Lena, sometimes you need your feelings hurt. I wanted to go give my wife a hug and a high five. That's great parenting. So rather than just coddle to the emotional reaction of the 3-year-old, oh, honey, I would never hurt your feelings. It's okay. And
I didn't mean to.
Yeah, all of that. No. If you're sinful
Yeah.
and if you're broken, sometimes you need your feelings hurt. And to teach that, to understand that. So a lot of times I think what happens is you have the person and they want to play guitar in the church, or they want to do this, or they think they should do this, and it's not even real.
Sure.
And they're so self-focused, they feel hurt, and so they immediately break fellowship. They immediately turn away. I think there's something in the perspective that Paul is talking about here that would help the church and the fellowship of the church tremendously, that we would prioritize the gospel and the exaltation of Jesus above how we feel.
Yeah.
Because I'm certain it doesn't make Paul feel good that these people are kind of putting him down and whatever
Sure.
that is. And yet his focus isn't like attacking them back. It's just that Jesus would be glorified. If we would embrace that, we would be so much slower to get offended. We'd be much more quick to be like, what do I need to learn in this? And it would give the church a much better starting point for dealing with those things than we probably currently have right now in the West. It would serve us really well. So that's just an aside. We see that every day in every discipling conversations, I think, within churches in the West. And it's something we got to be mindful of. And we can't just say, I'm sorry you feel that way, just because they feel that way. Because in our sin nature, there are often times in which we would do well to have our feelings hurt, because our feelings are sinful and broken. And to have those aimed in love by speaking truth I think is a gift. And so if we can figure out how to do that well and not be so quick to take offense and have more of a gospel perspective to that, it would just help us all. And so, myself included.
Yeah, that's good.
Anything else?
I have no final thoughts.
What? Nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing. Wow.
Well done.
All right, that's it. That was great. All right. Look, we're making it through season 2. We're rocking it.
I love it.
All right. Hey, listen, before you guys go, we're in, but it's not too late to jump in, grab some more resources. tcbchurch.org/Philippians. There are reading plans there to help you read and study along. There are great resources to help you kind of break down the text. There are sermons to listen to. Again, if you haven't been to that page, jump in and study along with us.
Yep.
We'll be back every week. Keep rolling with the podcast.
And to that point, keep looking at the website, because we're continuing to add more and more things to help us track through as we continue to study. So if you've looked at it already, keep checking, because we add more stuff.
And super practical thing, some people getting old like me, those are called accordion menus within each chapter.
You click on them and they
You can
open.
click on it and then all this stuff will appear. It's incredible. It's like magic, right? But don't forget to click on it. So where it says chapter 1, click on it. It'll break down.
That's right.
Keep going.
Yes.
Sweet. We
It's
good?
not magic. It's just what it does.
Well, okay. All right.
Bye.
Bye.